Welcome to Module 4 of the System DR Advanced Systems and ML Education track, the impact of high-dimensional problems on model selection and performance. Here's the question we're going to answer over the next 20 minutes. What actually happens to your models when the number of features starts to rival or even exceed the number of samples you have? It turns out the answer isn't just things get harder. It's that entire assumptions baked into cross-validation, distance metrics, and even the classical bias-variance trade-off quietly stop holding. By the end of this session, you'll know how to recognize when that's happening, how to regularize and validate correctly when it does, and where the cutting edge of research is actually challenging what we thought we knew about overfitting. This is an advanced track session aimed at ML engineers and data scientists who are already comfortable with regularized linear models and cross-validation and want to understand exactly where those tools break down and what to do instead. Let's start with a number that tends to stop people in their tracks. In 100 dimensions, 63% of a hypercube's volume sits within the outermost 1% shell. Let that sink in for a second. Almost 2/3 of the space is crammed into a razor-thin layer near the surface. Almost nothing is left in what we'd intuitively think of as the middle. That single geometric fact is the root of the curse of dimensionality, and it cascades into 3 very practical problems for anyone building models. First, distances stop discriminating. As the number of features grows, the ratio between your nearest neighbor's distance and your farthest neighbor's distance converges toward 1. K-nearest neighbors, clustering, and density estimation all quietly lose their signal. Second, cross-validation gets optimistic. When your feature count approaches or exceeds your sample count, a single train test split can overfit the validation set itself. Naive cross-validation doesn't fail loudly. It just silently inflates your reported performance. And third, model selection becomes combinatorial. Exhaustively searching subsets of your features is a 2 to the p problem. Past a few dozen predictors, that's simply not feasible, which is exactly why we lean on regularization instead of brute force search. Keep these 3 problems in mind. Everything else in this module is about solving one or more of them. This chart makes that curse of dimensionality concrete instead of abstract. What you're looking at is the percentage of a unit hypercube's volume that falls within its outer 1% shell, plotted against the number of dimensions. At 1 dimension, that's a trivial 1%. But look what happens as dimensionality climbs. 5% at 5 dimensions, 18% at 20, 63% at 100, and 87% by 200 dimensions. Here's the intuition for why this happens. To stay in the core of the space, a point has to stay close to the center on every single axis simultaneously. The probability of doing that across all of those axes at once shrinks geometrically as you add more of them. And this is exactly the same underlying mechanism that causes nearest neighbor and farthest neighbor distances to converge. Relative distance contrast simply collapses as dimensionality grows. What this means in practice: points in high dimensions live near the surface, not the interior. The local neighborhoods that k-nearest neighbors, kernel density estimators, and clustering algorithms depend on become sparse and nearly empty. The takeaway is straightforward. Distance-based methods need dimensionality reduction or a learned metric before you can trust them past roughly 15 to 20 raw features. Now for the part that tends to surprise even experienced practitioners. What actually happens to test error as we keep increasing model capacity past the point where the model can perfectly fit the training data? That's the interpolation threshold, marked in red, and it's actually the worst point on the entire curve, with test error spiking to its highest value. Keep going past it into the heavily over-parameterized regime, and test error falls again. That second decline is what Belkin and colleagues named double descent in 2019, and it directly challenges the assumption that more capacity always eventually means more overfitting. Here's why this matters for model selection specifically. If you're doing early stopping or searching over model capacity based on the old assumption of a single U-curve, you can easily stop your search right at the worst possible point, the interpolation threshold, instead of either pulling back to the classical optimum or pushing all the way through to that second benign overfitting descent. We'll come back to exactly when that second descent is trustworthy in a few minutes. Let's get concrete with a production quality implementation. This is a nested cross-validation function written for exactly the scenario we've been describing, where your feature count approaches your sample count. Notice the structure. There are two loops here, not one. The inner loop, that's inside the ElasticNet CV model itself, tunes alpha and L1 ratio. The outer loop, built with Scikit-learn's cross-val score, scores the tuned pipeline only on folds that the inner loop never touched during tuning. That separation is the whole point. Why does this separation matter so much? If you use a single cross-validation loop that both tunes your hyperparameters and reports your final score, you're reusing the same folds twice. In a high-dimensional setting, that can inflate your reported R-squared by 15 to 30%. That's not a rounding error. That's the difference between a model you should ship and one you shouldn't. Second, notice that we're using ElasticNet here, not plain Lasso. We're sweeping L1 ratio across a range from 0.1 up to 1.0. That lets correlated feature groups, which are extremely common in genomics data and in embedding spaces, survive together in the model, instead of Lasso arbitrarily picking just one representative feature group and zeroing out the rest. And finally, look at that try-except block wrapped around the cross-validation call. This isn't decorative. High-dimensional pipelines fail in genuinely confusing ways. Singular matrices, NaN propagation from sparse columns, and re-raising the error with the actual shape of your input array turns a cryptic solver stack trace into something an on-call engineer can actually act on at 2 in the morning. Not every dimensionality reduction technique serves the same purpose, and picking the wrong one for the job is one of the most common production mistakes I see. On the left, we have PCA, Principal Component Analysis. It's linear, it's fast, about 1.2 seconds on 20,000 features and 800 samples using a randomized SVD, and it's fully deterministic. Its components are linear combinations of your original features, so the loadings are genuinely inspectable. This makes PCA the right default when you're pre-processing before a linear or tree-based model, and especially when your features are noisy and correlated. On the right, we have the nonlinear methods, UMAP and TSNE. These preserve local neighborhood structure far better than PCA can, which is exactly why they're so good for visualization and cluster discovery. But they come with real costs. They're slower, roughly 8 to 15 seconds on that same data. They're stochastic, so you need to fix a random state for reproducibility. And critically, their axes carry no direct meaning at all. That last point is the one that trips teams up. A common anti-pattern is feeding UMAP output directly into a production classifier as if it were just another feature transform, without revalidating on every retrain. UMAP's transform step has no guarantee of reproducing the same geometry run to run. Use it for exploratory analysis and cluster QA. Be very careful before you wire it silently into a production model. Once you've decided how many features to keep, you still have to decide how to constrain the coefficients on whatever remains. This table compares your 3 main options. L1, or Lasso, drives coefficients exactly to 0, which gives you sparse, easy-to-explain models. But when several features are correlated, Lasso picks one of them somewhat arbitrarily and zeroes out the rest, which means your selected feature set can be unstable across retrains. Use it when your true signal is genuinely sparse, and feature selection itself is the goal. L2, or Ridge, never zeroes anything. It shrinks all coefficients towards 0, but keeps them all in the model. It distributes weight evenly across correlated features, which is more stable, though less interpretable. Use it when multicollinearity dominates, and you believe most of your features carry at least some real signal. ElasticNet blends both. Using that L1 ratio parameter we saw in the code a moment ago, it selects correlated feature groups together rather than arbitrarily picking one. This is why it's the safer default, particularly in genomics and embedding-heavy pipelines where correlated blocks of predictors are the norm, not the exception. The decision rule I'd leave you with: start with ElasticNet. Sweep L1 ratio from 0.1 to 1.0 and let cross-validation find where on that spectrum your data actually lives. It degrades gracefully to either Lasso or Ridge at the extremes, so you're rarely committing to the wrong prior upfront. Let's ground all of this in a real, publicly documented dataset. the Cancer Genome Atlas Pan-Cancer Classification Problem. Look at these numbers: 20,531 gene expression features, roughly 800 tumor samples per cohort. That's a 25 times ratio of features to samples, about as extreme a p greater than n scenario as you'll encounter in production machine learning. And yet, with the right pipeline, this problem is absolutely solvable. 94.6% held-out accuracy using nothing more exotic than elastic net regression and nested cross-validation. Here's how the pipeline actually handles a 25-to-1 feature-to-sample ratio in 3 stages. Step 1, a variance filter drops the bottom 40% of genes by expression variance before any modeling happens, cutting the feature count down to around 12,000 with negligible loss of real signal. Step 2, elastic net with nested cross-validation. Exactly the pattern from our code slide, where the outer 5-fold loop estimates generalization and the inner 5-fold loop tunes alpha and L1 ratio, avoiding the leakage we discussed earlier. And step 3, stability selection. The pipeline reruns on 200 bootstrap resamples, and only genes selected in more than 60% of those runs make it into the final reported biomarker panel. That third step is worth pausing on. It's a useful reminder that a single high accuracy number on its own doesn't tell you whether your feature selection is trustworthy. Stability across resamples is what earns that trust. We opened this module by treating more parameters than data as a warning sign. Let's complicate that a little, because this is genuinely where current research is pushing. Belkin and colleagues' 2019 double descent finding, the curve we looked at on slide 4, and Bartlett and colleagues' 2020 formalization of what they call benign overfitting, together show that certain overparameterized models, including some overparameterized linear regressions, can generalize well even when they perfectly interpolate noisy training data. The key technical condition, according to Bartlett's work, has to do with how variance spreads across the many near-zero eigenvalue directions of your feature covariance matrix, not simply how many parameters your model has. I want to be very clear about what this is not. This is not a green light to abandon regularization. It's an active area of research with narrow, well-characterized conditions under which it holds. Benign overfitting is a property of specific architectures and specific noise structures. It does not generalize to arbitrary high-dimensional linear models without some implicit bias toward low-norm solutions baked into how they're fit. So here's the practical heuristic to take away. If you must operate near or past the point where your feature count equals your sample count, prefer model families that carry implicit regularization, deep networks trained with stochastic gradient descent or minimum norm solvers over raw, unregularized linear fits. And regardless of which regime you believe you're operating in, validate with the nested cross-validation strategy from slide 5, every time. Let's consolidate everything into 5 heuristics you can carry directly into your next high-dimensional project. 1. Reduce or regularize before you trust distance. K-nearest neighbors, clustering, and kernel methods need PCA, UMAP, or a learned embedding once your feature count exceeds roughly 15 to 20 raw features. 2. Always nest your cross-validation once your feature count approaches your sample count. A single CV loop that both tunes and scores reuses the same folds, and that can inflate your reported performance by 15 to 30%. 3. Default to elastic net over committing early to pure lasso or ridge. Sweeping L1 ratio degrades gracefully to either extreme, so you're rarely locked into the wrong prior. 4. Overparameterization is not automatically overfitting. Past the interpretation threshold, test error can fall again, but only for model families that carry implicit regularization, and only under specific conditions on how noise is structured. And 5, report feature selection stability, not just accuracy. A single high-accuracy run can hide a feature set that's genuinely unstable across retrains. Bootstrap or stability selection frequency is what actually earns stakeholder trust. Run through these 5 before you ship any model where feature count starts to rival sample count, and you'll catch the leakage, instability, and false confidence issues this module has covered before they ever reach a production dashboard. A few places to go deeper. The 2 papers referenced throughout this module, Belkin, Hu, Ma, and Mondel's 2019 PNAS paper on reconciling modern machine learning with the bias-variance trade-off, And Bartlett, Long, Lugosi, and Sigler's 2020 PNAS paper on benign overfitting in linear regression are the primary sources behind everything we covered on the double descent slide and the frontier insight slide. For implementation, Scikit-learn's own documentation on cross-validation is the best reference for the nested CV pattern from slide 5. It's the single most commonly misimplemented pattern in this whole module, so it's worth bookmarking. The UMapLearn documentation covers the tool referenced on slide 6. And if you want to explore the actual dataset behind our case study, the TCGA Pan-Cancer Atlas is publicly available through the Genomic Data Commons. All of this, along with the course itself, is linked at the course home address shown at the top of this slide. That's your fastest way back into the full module. That brings us to the end of the core content for this module. Thank you for working through high-dimensional model selection with me. I want to leave you with an open question, deliberately. If the number of features in your systems keeps growing, whether that's from feature engineering, from ingesting inherently high-dimensional data like genomics or embeddings, or just from scaling an existing pipeline past its original design assumptions, what's the next thing that breaks? If you've got your own P greater than N scenario sitting on your desk right now, bring it. We can walk through the reduction, regularization, and validation strategy together, live, using exactly the patterns we covered today. And when you're ready to continue, you'll find Module 5 waiting at the course link on screen now. Thanks again for your time.